Outdoors Queensland respectfully acknowledges the traditional owners of the lands where we gather across the state and across Australia. We pay respect to elders past, present and emerging, and recognise the important roles that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples play on the lands, skies and waterways used for outdoor activities. Those places of connection with the outdoors and of learning and teaching in partnership with the surrounding environment since time immemorial. I'm on Yagara country, which is a place of the Jagera and Turrbal peoples. And if you'd like to, you can pop in the chat the place and the country that you're on today. Outdoors Queensland also acknowledges the funding provided by the Queensland Government to support outdoor activities across the state, and acknowledge the work that various government departments and ministers do and have done regarding outdoor activities, including sport and recreation within the Department of Tourism, Innovation and Sport and Recreation. Welcome to today's session of Coffee and Conversation. My name is Dom Courtney. I'm the Executive Officer of Outdoors Queensland, and our Operations Manager, Mark Squires, is a co-host for today's session. We also have Brendan Munge as a special co-host for today's session. Brendan's President of the Outdoor Educators Association of Queensland, and we're following on from last week. We want to again deliver today's session jointly. So welcome to Brendan. I think you're there somewhere on my list, mate.
Okay, hello.
Hello, mate.
Just snuck in.
Good work. I'd also like to welcome all members of Outdoors Queensland and members of OEAQ who are joining us, and anyone else who's joining us, including reps from interstate organisations and national organisations like Rod from ACA. So yeah, welcome. I think Graham Jones might be on there from CVA as well, but everyone's welcome, of course. As you're probably aware, this is a special extra unscheduled episode of Coffee and Conversation outside our normal fortnightly schedule. So yeah, we'll get stuck into it as we go along. Please use the chat as we go along. Thanks for those who have shared there, and no worries, Rod, about jumping out after half an hour. Thanks for joining us, mate. Just looking at the chat messages there. So the agenda for today, it's a pretty simple one. That's it. Normally we have several opportunities, different things to discuss. Unfortunately, we don't have a representative from Education Queensland joining us today. We were hoping to have someone from Education Queensland, but they were unable to join us today. But we're hoping that we'll have a rep from EQ able to join next week's session. So I'm sorry that we don't have someone today from Education Queensland. But we will get on with the show anyway and work through. So yeah, and I think, I'm not sure, but I think we have Tiani from Tiani Van Heren from Sport and Rec with us. I was just checking the list, but so we do have some government reps here. We also have obviously workers from the outdoors who are employed by government, but we don't have a rep from head office of Education Queensland as far as I know. So that agenda, I've just expanded it a little. So if we're talking about resumption of school camps, some dot points there about things to talk about today. So when can camps resume? What changes, if any, need to be made? What can be done to reassure COVID safety? What else do we have to consider? What's OEAQ doing, and what's Outdoors Queensland doing? And I guess the other one is, what are we all doing? So as we go along, yep, these are the sort of things I'd just like to talk about today, and focusing on that resumption of camps when we can. I just saw a comment in there, smallest agenda ever in Coffee and Conversation. It is, mate, but it's, I guess it's a simple agenda, but a complex topic is probably how I would put that one. And Andrew just said, could Education Queensland be sent the recording? Perhaps, yeah, definitely. We'll send them a link once we've got that available. So, yeah, that's certainly, mate, good suggestion. If anyone else has other topics, this agenda, happy to raise it either in the chat or put your hand up, please do. We want to discuss as much as we can as we go along. So I'm not going to go through all the stuff about the roadmap and all that sort of business. I think you're all aware of that. I hope so. But I do want to do a quick reminder about that new normal that's along the bottom of the roadmap, and I always do this, but it's actually an important point about the physical distancing, mask wearing, hand hygiene, the staying home when sick, the Check in Queensland app where required, and that's changing, the vaccination and tests. So yeah, so that's still an important part of what this looks like, to reassure everyone. And I just saw Greg's just put a point. Thanks for joining us, Greg, and representing CVA. Thanks, mate. So we went through this last week, the back to school plan, with my green circles. That, to be honest, I think this slide looks particularly messy, and perhaps there's a reason for that. So this was released on the 30th of January, on Sunday. As it says there, you know, I've highlighted that fine print at the bottom, which talks about this COVID situation can change, and goes through it. But the real kicker for us, I guess, is that suspension of school camps, excursions, assemblies and large gatherings up the top there. So just trying to progress on what this means, I suppose, for the industry. So Mark shared a link to it. You know, I think really it's about the impacts of the suspension of school camps. We talked about that last week, and I'd really like to just share with everyone just the snapshot of the polls that we did last week, which, you know, I'll just show you, I guess, the results. We sort of went through it a little bit quickly last week. So we ran 4 polls, and the results are there on the screen. There's a lot of words there, but basically, I really want to say thank you to those who contributed to these polls, who answered the polls. I've also provided a summary to government as a snapshot, just to highlight the impacts on operators and workers of this suspension. And the figures, I think, are quite concerning. And I'm not a psychologist, but would really encourage everyone to look after yourselves and seek help where necessary. The one about anxiety particularly concerns me. I know, you know, it's not, it possibly could have been worded better, that question, but I think just as an indicator, I think it does indicate that if we, you know, maybe need to consider that side of things and looking after yourselves at this time when there is potentially high levels of anxiety and uncertainty. But the other ones in there too, you know, the 35% being not confident that their organisation will still operate in 12 months. The impact on workers is severe, obviously. An impact on business operators, where you could select multiple answers. You know, they're pretty big figures. So that's a significant factor there. Yeah, so I just wanted to. I just saw some comments in the chat there about, could you poll, from Andrew, has your business been significantly damaged? Which, yeah. And then Tanya, if you want to, might expand on that one when we get a little bit further in, if that's okay, if we can just park that for the minute. Tanya asked a question about 16-year-olds attending school camp, coming from school groups. So I just want to, I guess, if anyone has any comments on those polls, happy to take them or have a chat. All right, otherwise I think we'll keep on moving along. So on the 3rd of February, Queensland Health have a document, preparing for and managing COVID-19 in schools and early childhood education and care. And this document's been raised, it's been published on the Education Department's COVID-19 website, and there's a link there to it. So I actually think it'd be worthwhile to go through this document together and actually have a look at what's in it, because I don't know if everyone's aware of it. I only got confirmation yesterday that it had been publicly available, so we haven't put it out yet because we only just found that out late yesterday. So Mark's just shared the link, but I think it's worth having a look at this document. So I might just change the share to this actual document, if you bear with me for a moment. Let me just find it. Not that I've got a million tabs open or anything like that. So I'm hoping that you guys can see this screen that I've got open now. So this is this document, which Mark's just shared the link to, which has been put out by Queensland Health, but it's on the Education Department website. Do I need to make that bigger, please? Is that better? Yep. So the guiding principles of this talks about health response to managing schools, COVID in schools and early childhood in Queensland, following the national framework, and it sets them out. And then it talks about the key roles of school and early childhood education centres. So they talk about having the COVID safe plan for your organisation. It talks about quite a lot of measures that are in here that are, we've already talked about. They're probably the things that were in the industry plan last year. Some of them are new things, such as the face masks available appropriately worn by students, staff and visitors. So in the industry plans last year, we talked about having appropriate PPE available. So it would be generally covered, but I think it might be time to look at this document and consider what changes might be needed. They actually talk here about introducing class bubbles or other ways of cohorting the school community. So that these parts are generally about schools. They're not just about school camp. They talk about establishing communication processes, about what happens, and they have this quick reference guide, which is really valuable, and I'd recommend having a look through this. It talks about students in year 3 to 6 provided with masks, strongly encouraged to wear them when physical distancing is not possible, and all high school students must wear masks unless they're seated or able to maintain a 1.5 metre distance. So some of this has been in the media, but this document sets it out quite well. It then talks about the suspension of school camps there, and talks about outside school hours care. But there's some points in here which are about the actual management of COVID-19 that I think is an important part of this. So, the key one there, I hope that share's still going. Is that okay? Yep, cool. So talks about what to do with close contacts. It says that students and staff in a classroom or indoor space together with a case do not meet the close contact definition in the direction. It talks about boarding students, and then it talks about what to do in relation to teachers from that side of things. But this next section about people with symptoms of COVID, it specifically says if anyone's unwell with COVID while at school, they should isolate and return home as soon as possible. They should get tested for COVID. And it says if they develop symptoms while at school, a RAT will be provided by the school to be administered at home. It doesn't say do a RAT test at the school and then you can go back to class if it comes back negative. So that's an important point on this, and I think it's going to have an impact if those are the rules that are going to be followed. I think that's a really important point that needs to be considered for school camps. Does anyone want to comment on that?
That's basically what we've done since time immemorial with any kid that gets sick on camp. So apart from the RAT test, but one would assume the schools would come with their own supply of RAT tests. We've got our supply of RAT tests if they don't have it. But the concept of a parent picking a child up from school or from camp is nothing new.
No, but my point is, if there's any symptom, it's not that you do a rat test at the camp and then the child can continue if they have a negative result. If there's any symptom, they get given a rat test to do that test at home. And if they come back negative, then you've got to make a decision, right? So that's the point, that if they have any symptoms, and the symptoms include, they're in that, we can look at it, but they're in the document in the Public Health Directive. One of those symptoms is fatigue. And I would suggest most kids who go to school camp at some point are going to have fatigue. So I just think we need to think about how this actually works in practice.
So I think maybe in practice, and reading in the some of the legislation that we've had to follow for vaccination requirements, is what a client does is their responsibility, and what we do as an operator is our responsibility. So if we just need to be careful that we're not blurring the lines, that this is an Ed Queensland document for Ed Queensland employees and Ed Queensland schools, and we work with the client under what they need to be responsible for. I think if we start saying we'll do this and we'll do that and we'll do this, that's a separate to this document. This document is for our clients to follow, and then our clients will inform us on what they would like us to do, rather than us saying, well, we're going to do this as a school camp.
The other thing to note, Dom, is a few paragraphs down from where you're talking, it does say, even if a student's negative, they're still not meant to return to school until their symptoms are resolved. Yep. So even if we were doing rat tests on camp, if they're symptomatic, they've still got to go home. So whether they do the rat test at camp or at home, I don't know if it really matters. Mm-hmm. They're going home.
Yep. So that's so I think this is what you need to think about, and I take Guy's point about the school has responsibility in relation to this as well. But I think for operators, it's going to inform how you operate your camp. If the school is going to, stick to these rules which they've been given, then some of it is going to require some of the points that Andrew Grant just made about sending kids home when they're crook is not unusual. But you need to think about how you're going to do that, how you're going to manage it. So there is a section in this document, I'll sort of just scroll down, page 10 has a specific section on camps. So what it talks about, it does use that household-like contact as part. I think that's providing the reasoning for the suspension of camps in accommodation. Then it says, when camps are permitted, this and camp locations which have no other schools or members of public on site at the time are preferred. So that one is actually going to have an impact on larger camp operators who may be able to have multiple schools, who regularly have multiple schools on site at the same time. It's also going to have an impact on schools that use places like national parks for expeditions, where there could be other members of the public. So I think that's something to be considered. Again, it's a consideration for the schools, but it's also a consideration for operators who may be leading some of those sort of camps, or maybe used to hosting multiple schools. So I just want to flag that, because I think that piece, it does say preferred, it doesn't say mandatory, but that point I think is going to cause some concern. I'd be happy to open that up for.
Dom, can I ask why there seems to be a default that we just need to accept this? And firstly, this document is not Education Queensland, it's Queensland Health, who throughout the pandemic, we work very closely with in terms of the industry plan and so on and so forth. This appears to be an example of Queensland Health attempting to tell us how to run our businesses. So I'm just querying why we're not talking about pushing back on this, because we've had consistent plans in place to deal with a lot of these things. And it just seems like decisions are now being made about our operations that we're not even part of the conversation about.
Yeah, so I've raised these points, mate. As I say, we had no consultation in the preparation of this document. We're basically in a reactive mode, I suppose, looking at it and trying to understand all the implications and make those clear. Whether, this document could be updated again today for all I know. But yep, I'm not saying, I'm just trying to outline what's in this right now so that people are aware of it. I'm not saying it's necessarily set in stone. This document's dated 3rd of February. We know a lot can change quickly, but yeah, certainly I've flagged particularly this one because I think it has an impact for larger camps that can have, as I said, multiple schools, but also any school that was intending to go to a national park for a camp. And that includes, anywhere where there's potentially members of the public. So that's why I have already flagged that as well. But I haven't got access to the authors of this document, as you would appreciate. So I'm trying to get some messaging across to there. So,
but we deal with that dynamic right now, and it is already impacting us well beyond the 4th of March. So, it doesn't seem like there's an understanding that these have significant consequences for our industry. And when you take 2 or 3 weeks or 4 to 6 weeks or whatever it is to kind of listen and learn, our staff are fielding phone calls about this issue right now and have been doing all week.
Yep, I only got this document officially yesterday, and I've already questioned sections of it before I even had it officially. So
the schools got it last Friday, at least.
So I'm telling you what I did, Andrew. I'm already questioned it. The thing is, we don't get an answer straight away, and we don't get responses. And I'm trying to deal with it. But I guess. I'm happy to discuss it, and I'm not saying we just accept everything in here, but I think we need to be aware of what is in here right now, because these will be if there's no changes to this, I imagine these will be the rules under which most schools will operate if they don't have anything else to go by, including potentially independent and Catholic schools, even if it isn't a directive to them. This is what's happened with the suspension of camps. So we need to acknowledge
I'd say differently. It's a Queensland Health document generically about schools, and it was distributed to the independent school sector. So of course they're going to take notice of it. It's not an EQ document, it's a Queensland Health document. So all schools assume this will apply to them.
Yeah, that's what I just said.
Can I just ask, sorry, Tanya?
Yeah, Tanya.
Just jumping in, very random question, but just wondering, what's the consequence besides schools not rebooking or booking with us of not complying with this?
I don't know, Tanya. Like it's not part of the public health direction. It's a policy document, as far as I understand it, but whether it becomes part of the public health direction is a different question. So this document isn't part of the public health direction. It's a guidance document, I guess, for schools on the resumption of schools and managing, as it's called, preparing for and managing COVID-19 in schools and early childhood education and care. So
as an industry, could we be putting a statement to say we're going to follow our original plans that we had in place, and we reject this?
Yeah, I guess anyone can do that. I guess the problem's going to be, are the schools going to accept that position? Or are we, and I guess the other question is, the question's going to come back of, so you're not following Queensland Health's guidance on this, and we need to acknowledge that if we're talking about matters of health, as much as they may not understand all the nuances of our industry, they are the experts when it comes to health. And I know that this is a difficult thing, but we need to think about it in that lens.
Then it would be better if it was put in a public health direction, because currently we are operating according to the lawful, legal public health direction.
Yep. and I've made that point multiple times, and the public health direction specifically includes a clause about school excursions, etc., and what they have to do for contact check-in, contact tracing. So the public health direction specifically talks about schools and excursions, basically still saying it's allowed right now. So it's still there in the version of the public health direction that was updated just this week. So under the public health direction, excursions can go ahead. So, but the education, as we know, that's suspended under the back to school plan for state schools.
Hey Dom, just a quick question. What's your thoughts about? There was a piece on ABC the other night about a boarding school just restarting in Townsville a couple of days ago, and obviously with the blessing of Department of Ed. So, is there any point just reflecting that back to Queensland Ed to say that there's not a lot of difference between a school, boarding school situation and kids coming to camp?
Yeah, the rules for boarding schools have changed a little bit. So there's some specific stuff about who's a close contact in a boarding school situation in relation to arrangements of beds and that sort of thing. So they've changed that basically so that boarding schools can operate, but there's also other requirements in there. I haven't dug into all of it, but I know there has been some changes there, Dave, and it's certainly in the mix. So it's and I think a big part of this is really understanding what's in here and what the issues are in here, and that need to be pushed further out. But I wanted to make sure, to go through this with everyone.
Dom, I think the confusing part is this time it's like previously, so we've got kids returning back to school, we've got kids going to boarding, where so previously these things were being limited, and I think Mark's mentioned there the field of play. So we were able to define, and it was consistent amongst all of the. I guess it was a bit more consistency amongst contact, no contact, and this time it's not as consistent and a little bit more confusing for me as an operator, anyway.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I agree, Tanya. Like when the industry plan disappeared, was made inactive, those were some of the points that we raised then about, well, hang on, what about these protocols that we've got in place to manage all of these things? So yeah, it's very, very difficult on some of these things. And Mark's point is, about students maintaining physical distancing. I think, where it says, where is the point about that? It's assured again, but I think at the same time, at school right now, you can play school sport. So, there are exceptions to these things. So I think we need to think about how this works, and what its actual practical application is. I think just this is the whole section on school camps. I just think it's worth having a look here too. It does talk about students and staff who have symptoms of COVID or are awaiting a COVID result must not attend. If someone becomes symptomatic while at camp, they should be isolated away from others, and arrangements made for the staff member or student to return home by private transport as soon as possible and undergo a COVID test. So that's in line with that bit that we talked about earlier about do the test at home. If you've got any symptoms, don't be coming back. So I think that would apply whether it's at camp or at school. It specifically says there that about face masks. So masks to be worn indoors on school camp by all staff and by students, as outlined in Table 1, which talks about the different ages. Then it says face masks not required to be worn while sleeping, which makes sense. But staff and students should maintain physical distancing and practice good hand and hygiene, respiratory hygiene. That's while on camp. So it talks about the entire camp. And then it talks about if someone's diagnosed, what you should do. And then it talks about who is a household-like contact and be required to test and quarantine. So people have shared accommodation, and it doesn't have that difference bit about boarding boarding dorms as well, which I'm not sure what the basis of that is. I just saw Guy's question, is there a legal angle to take as an association? I don't know, Guy. I'm not here as a lawyer, mate. It's something that, you know, that certainly, like in New South Wales, just recently, they've released a support package for the operators who were affected in term 4 last year, because they had a suspension of camps as a result of as I understand it, result of Department of Education policy. They've just now, last week, released a support package, multi-million dollars for their operators as a result of that. So, you know, maybe that's something.
Sorry, Dom, I know you're not a lawyer, but can the association not seek legal advice and see if it's a possible pathway? Because if, in a similar vein, in a business, if someone was to say something in a press release that then caused some sort of insider trading or something or other, there would be accountability to that. And that's a little bit similar to what's happened here. We've followed legislation, but a throwaway back to school document that doesn't have any actual accountability to it. Is there legal advice that we could seek? Someone who would know whether this is a possible path to take or not. I think it might be useful because they're not listening any other way, and it might be a no, and they might just close it out. But I think maybe as an association, is that not something that possibly we as a group could agree to happen?
Well,
Our legal advice is there's no legislative backing for this suspension of camps. So our contracts are still valid. But we've been placed in a situation where it's, you know, it's more the pub test. We could, as an industry, just go out and say, well, if you've got a contract with us in February and you can't come, too bad. We're still going to impose our cancellation policies in theory. But I mean, you've got to take a long-term view on it. But it basically is the industry that is paying the price for what is being put out there as a common sense and cautious approach.
Yeah, I think, again, to answer Guy's question directly, I'd have to get permission from the Outdoors Queensland board to get, you know, to go and get legal advice about that, you know, to spend money on that. So it's not something that this group can decide, you know, that I'm going to spend Outdoors Queensland money on doing that. I'm not saying we're not going to do it, but what I'm saying is I think, you know, I genuinely do understand the pain that's happening, you know, that is being experienced. And I don't want to, you know, certainly don't, I'm not trying to just say no to things. I'm trying to work on all the different angles and what we can do. So, you know, that's something that is certainly in the mix of what this, you know, the impact of all of this. And that's why we're going the political route as well in trying to get answers for some of these things. And yeah, I think the problem part of this is that things are happening quickly and the wheels of government do not always turn quickly. They have sometimes responded really quickly to some of these things, but yeah, and it's certainly, we're trying to work within the system, but we're also trying to work on the system at the same time in trying to improve things. So I'm not saying, no, we're not going to do that, but I'm just saying it's something that we need to consider all the different avenues in this. And there is, as Andrew just said, that long-term approach. If you stuck to your guns and said legally, you've still got a booking with us and we expect you to honour it, you know, that it's got to be what's the practical approach here.
Tom, can I ask what kind of communication or engagement we've had with Ed Queensland and Queensland Health regarding all this in the last week or so, like as an industry? Do you know, I assume you're connecting with people?
Yes, Aaron, yep. I've had, I guess, a string of emails backwards and forwards with Education Queensland, not so much with Queensland Health. It's more about engaging for us through Sport and Rec, and Tiani's here today, who's Director of Partnerships from Sport and Rec. Tiani's also been liaising with other people from health and also the education department on our behalf. And I need to acknowledge that, because it's not just me, it's other people as well doing that work. I think a part of this is that we're copying, and I'm not saying, I shouldn't use it. Part of what we're experiencing is the fact that this is the first week back at school, and the education department, rightly or wrongly, are trying to work out what the situation is for the spread of COVID in those schools. And right now, I think there's still some big unknowns as far as what this is going to look like in the next 3 weeks. And I think that maybe there's a bit of trying to see what's going to happen, and maybe they'll know more by next week. But also there's a whole lot of uncertainty, and I think anyone would know that.
You obviously expected an Ed Queensland rep, and I think also a Queensland Health rep to be part of the call too at one point, Tom. Is that right? And they pulled out like at the last minute or something?
Yeah, I tried to line up reps from both Education Queensland and Queensland Health, as well as Sport and Rec. Tiani's here. But yeah, unfortunately, the person from Education Queensland was unable to join us today, but has indicated they'd join next week, the session next week. So I guess, don't think there's been no conversation with them, and don't think they're not aware that this is an issue. But I think, and I know that it's an issue for them. Like they're well aware of, what's happening here, and that's why, I guess that's part of what we're doing in trying to make it clear and trying to make this all understood better. So
I just want to support Dom there in the sense that, like, from the Outdoor Education Association's perspective, there has been attempts to dialogue with Education Queensland, and we're getting, from people within schools trying to contact them as well, and we're getting very little engagement from them. There's not a lot of support coming to give teachers support as to know whether, like, I can see, like, Linda's raised the question of, teachers are asking us, can we continue with camps after 5th of March? And they're starting to cancel things because they don't have assurances. So Education Queensland, they're not even, they're from our perspective, Dom's been doing a great job. He's getting a lot more from them than what we are. And from within the education area, we're not getting very much at all. So, but a lot of that's probably to do with first week back and them holding their hands down low to not show their cards yet.
Yeah. And I think part of that is, they are genuinely, like, it's the first week back at school. The education department, including the people in the head office, are really under the pump. Like this, they are fielding all sorts of issues, particularly around COVID. And so this is a really tough week for them too. And I think I'm not trying to minimize anything for outdoor operators, but I think we need to think about that aspect of this as well, that the context that they're operating in. And I think that needs to be considered in some of this. So, yeah, so I think maybe we leave it there. I think that I just saw Danny put a point in there about the document, what are the next steps? And that's probably a good point. I think we need to maybe look at that and get into what we can do to ensure that camps can resume, and that people have that confidence that camps can resume from the 4th of March, the 5th of March, whatever that next date is, the start of week 5. So there is more in that document, and it's certainly worth a look at, but we might leave it there. I really think it's worth having a good look at that. There was something also that they changed just yesterday about the definition of fully vaccinated at the national level, and it's now, I think, includes the 3rd dose, what we've been calling a booster. So probably need to be aware of that in relation to workers. I'm not sure when that's going to come in, but just be aware of that as well. Just wanted to flag that also. Yeah, so I might just leave that one there, that there is a whole lot in that document, and you've got the link to it. So I'll stop that share. So I do have, I'll just share this one if I can find it. Back to the presentation. So right now, I've got a draft scenario document, which I've done and I've sent to some people for comments a while back, but it needs updating. And I've put some scenarios together, which are the 5 on the screen there. Hoping you can all see that. So some of them are quite simple as far as they're actually answered in that Queensland Health document, which says a person is about to come to camp's diagnosed or develop symptoms before attending. And under that document, it straight up just says, no, you can't come, which is always the sort of thing had there. Then it talks about what happens if someone's diagnosed at camp, if they're a close contact of a diagnosed case while they're at camp, if they're at camp and develop symptoms, which is what we just talked about, or they've recently been at camp and is diagnosed with COVID. So I've got this document. I guess the question is, do we want to go through that for 10 minutes and I can show you some of the proposed actions, and I'm still happy to change it. I'm more than happy to do that right now. And maybe it's worth doing because it can show you the sort of stuff that that we've put in there. I just saw a yep from Danny. So I'll just share that document. Just bear with me. Here we go. Hopefully. Where did my document go? Can you guys see the Word document with the word scope at the top? Yeah, cool. Okay. So I'm not going to read all that out. It's pretty, I'll make it a bit bigger for you.
Sorry, Dom, it's still on the previous document, preparing for managing COVID.
Oh, okay.
This for me anyway.
Let's try again. That better?
That's the one.
Yes.
Okay. So this is, it's got a big draft watermark on it because it is a draft, and yeah. So it is it's just a guidance, and I'm not trying to tell you how to do your job, but what I'm trying to do is trying to summarize some of the information that's available, and it's just for consideration for operators, and it's designed for outdoor operators. So what I've done in here, I've put together a heap of links, which is, you know, the new, they've updated some of these public health directions. I've gone through and updated some of them. I'm more than happy to send this out. It's only a draft. I sort of want to do a bit of work on it and finish it, and then we might circulate it. But some of it actually might need more comments or even consultation with health and education. So I'm happy to go through it. But I guess the thing I wanted to do, there's a whole heap of stuff that I think most people have already done, but I've put it in here anyway, which is about reviewing continuity plans, considering workforce planning, etc. I'm not going to read everything out. I'll get into these scenarios, but even the stuff about your workplace health and safety plan. And some of this is well and truly covered if you've got an operational plan that lines up with the industry plan for outdoor education providers that we had until last year. So some of this stuff you'll already have no dramas. There's other things, you know, such as maintaining up-to-date contact details for employees to help with contact tracing if required. So things like that, and some extra stuff in there. I'll go through this pretty quickly because I think the scenarios and the actions is probably the key piece. So those are 5 scenarios that are on the that other screen I had before. So the scenario 1, person about to come to camp, diagnosed or develop symptoms. So basically straight up, they can't come. They'll not be able to attend whether they're a worker or a participant. So they have to self-isolate anyway and may need testing, so they can't come. The only action I put there was including health screening questions that specifically asked about COVID diagnosis and COVID symptoms with clear communication about non-attendance. You might already have that. I just thought I'm just putting it there as a suggestion. So happy to take feedback as we go along too. Yeah, so please sing out if there's something there that you go, what are you talking about? Please say so. That one is basically the easiest one, I think. So this next one is someone's diagnosed with COVID while they're at camp. And it basically says you've got to follow the public health direction when you get the diagnosis. In Queensland right now, any diagnosed person has to isolate for 7 days. So if they're diagnosed outside their home, they've got to travel directly to the premises they'll be isolating at by private transport, ambulance or government arranged transport. That's what it actually says in the public health direction. So the action I've got there, which I haven't put in grey, but I will because I've tried to colour them all in nicely, is consider who's responsible for transport. So it might be the school's responsibility. It might be the parents coming to pick them up, like Chandra mentioned before, but also for workers. But it could also be you as a provider, and you need to have that, I think, communicated to everyone involved. So that's the piece I put there. It's not necessarily saying you need to provide that transfer. I'm just saying you need to communicate it with the school up front or whoever, or it could be a church group coming to your centre or a
Sorry, Dom.
group. Yep.
How would someone be diagnosed while at camp? Because we're not doing RAT tests and we don't do PCR tests while at camp. So that scenario doesn't make much sense to me.
Yeah, if you're not doing any at camp, don't forget you could actually be doing it in relation to your workers. So if a worker does a RAT comes in, then it applies to them as well. So as I said before, some of this needs to be updated because of that Queensland Health document, but that applies particularly for the school, right? So it could be any of your workers there at the camp. It's a good question, but Benoni. And
Adam, just looking at your question, I think part of the health directive from schools was that if someone has a suspicion that someone is unwell or showing symptoms of being unwell without needing to diagnose it, I think you can make a determination that they need to go home. I don't think you need to have to even say that it's COVID. If it's the symptoms or otherwise, then you can make that determination, and then you're covered by the Chief Health Officer's public health direction.
But if we're being realistic here, in the middle of the year, you know, in the middle of winter, where you might have half your cohort show up with a snotty nose and a cough, you know, that could be extremely disruptive. Like, who are we to say, oh, you've got 60 kids here and 30 of them are coughing, they all need to go home?
Mm.
Yeah,
and this is what we've been dealing with the whole time since the very beginning of COVID, is that, you know, kids are, you know, they have strong immune systems, but they do present multiple symptoms all the time. Like we said, tiredness is one, you know, kids, you know, it's extremely, extremely difficult as someone operating in the field, like working with a group, to determine whether a kid, you know, whether you're going to be the one who says this kid needs to go home. And I know it's up to the teachers to determine that, but, you know, if you're talking about sending every kid home who shows a symptom, you're going to go down a path that just makes camps unviable.
And that's a real concern, Adam. Thank you.
Sorry, can I just add in? Are we operating in a realm we don't need to be in? It's the client's responsibility to follow the health directives the same as we are. If we start putting down saying this is what we will do and we should do, and it's just a space that we don't need to inform them. They've got health directives. We just need to let our clients know we're following them. They are changing day to day. And if anything was to come up on camp, my advice would be you read the health direction and you make the decision, and we'll support you because you're the client. I think if we're going to start saying, we will do this, we will do that, we will do this, it's a whole other space and a whole other realm that really we don't need to operate in, because we just need to, our blanket statement is we're following the health directives as they stand on the day.
But you do need to have it for your own workers, Guy. It's not just about the kids or the visiting teachers.
Yeah, correct.
So,
and I have that for our own workers, and that's a legislative public health directive, which I am responsible for my workers. That interpretation is for the workers only, not visitors on site. They actually differentiate that in the definitions. So we're responsible for our workers, and so I'm following the legislative public health direction for that. But what the client chooses to do, that's their decision, because according to the legislated stuff, is their visitors on site. And as long as I'm doing my bit, they choose to do their bit. I don't think we need to add another document in place that reinterprets what's already there. Just a thought. I'm not being antagonistic.
Completely up to you. Yeah, that's completely up to every organisation. I'm happy to share this, and as I said at the start, it's just something for you to consider. If you don't want to do it, that's cool. I think part of this is about having something to show that the industry has considered what is going to happen here, and trying to reassure that we will or can comply. And that's really what I'm trying to get to. And I take your point completely, but I think at the same time, if we can show an understanding of what the situation is as at today, then that shows that it's not just a token effort, that it is trying to have a system in place to think about these scenarios. And I'm not saying these answers are necessarily right. Some of them just say, consider X. They're not saying you must do it. And most of them actually are worded that way deliberately. Because who am I to tell you how to run your business? As Andrew said earlier, I'm not trying to tell you. I'm just trying to flag what needs to be considered. So I went on with then what happens with people who are not considered close contacts with a diagnosed person. So they can keep working or continue to work or participate, but think about other actions that might be required. Such as preparing in advance appropriate communication, rather than having to prepare that when reacting to the situation. So thinking about reviewing your programmed activities, including your supervision ratios. So that's, for instance, if a worker has to go home, or you can't meet your supervision ratios. Also in there about arranging for cleaning of accommodation used by the diagnosed person, if necessary. And then the last one was arrange a clearly outlined space to be used by a diagnosed person to isolate him while awaiting transportation. So happy to add other things in here. So again, don't forget that was a scenario where they're diagnosed with COVID. The next one is they're informed they're a close contact of someone who's a diagnosed person. And this one could happen that one of their household members has tested positive for COVID while they've been at camp, or they could be a close contact of another person at the camp who's been diagnosed, the scenario above. So it talks about the household-like contact definition. And it says in that public health direction about the person who spent more than 4 hours with the diagnosed person in a house or other place of accommodation. So that's straight out of that public health direction. And then I talked about sharing a room or tent. Now there's information in that Queensland Health document that I need to add in here. So this needs a bit more work, but it talks about the close contacts. It says a person's not a household-like contact if they're in a separate part of the house, accommodation, etc. And this comes from trying to expand that to say if an accommodation building has multiple rooms, people who shared the bedroom or dorm would be close contacts, but people who stayed in other rooms in the building would not be considered close contacts. So that's our understanding of it. And I think we need to just make sure of these things. So this list is straight off the government website. I haven't checked it today, but this was the list of what a person who's a close contact must do. And it's straight off the website. It talks about what they have to do as far as quarantining, etc. So the actions there was operators to consider whether they're able to provide quarantine accommodation to close contacts, because one of the things it says here is that you must have a suitable place to quarantine if their home or current place of accommodation. Sorry, a person can only travel to their home if it's not more than 2 hours safe driving distance from the place where they find out they're a close contact. And that can be a real problem. So you need to think about that, of what happens on quarantine accommodation for close contacts. If you can't provide it, you got to get the transport. So you got to consider who's responsible for transporting them, and then consider communicating that position to workers and clients in advance. Is the suggestion there. It talks about if you're not a close contact, what should you do? And again, we've got the similar things as above. Comms for workers, participants, and others, rather than doing it in the situation. So having that done in advance. Reviewing your activities, same sort of thing as above, and then the cleaning of accommodation of people who are close contacts as well. So that's on the websites as well. This next section is that one that I said this needs a whole heap of work because of that Queensland Health document. If that's going to be followed, it actually is completely different. So a person who's at camp exhibits symptoms consistent with COVID, and this goes to Adam's point before, they say the best approach is assume the person has COVID unless testing shows otherwise. And the list of the symptoms are there, which are long. This is straight out of, this pink bit is straight out of the Queensland Health document. If a person is at camp exhibits symptoms consistent with COVID, arrange for them to be isolated and arrange for them to return home by private transport and undergo a COVID-19 test at home. It doesn't say the words at home, but it's deliberately after it. So I did a bit of a flowchart saying, well, what happens if it's positive? What happens if it's negative? But I'm not sure that's relevant if that's how it's going to operate. I guess the difference would be for workers, and this is a section that needs work. So I just wanted to flag that. I did put some actions in here of what happens and even having a position statement if the rat result is negative. Would they be allowed to stay or not? And under that that Queensland Health document, it's just like if anyone's got symptoms, they're going home. So that's a big issue as far as I'm concerned. Anyone further comments on that one?
Would it be worth, I don't know whether this is going to work or not, but would it be worth putting it, as we've said a number of times, back on the client and do something similar like they do in the international travel space, where, all kids who are attending camp and all staff all need to have a negative rat test 72 hours before arriving or something along those lines, so that we know that if we get a huge group come through, 100, 120 people, and you do have a few that are displaying symptoms, but don't necessarily, then we can already say, all right, well, they did a rat test, within this certain amount of time. And we at least then we're ticking a box saying that everybody who's attending has had a negative test in the last 2 days, 24 hours, whatever it is.
Yep. I don't know, Adam. I don't know how much that's going to be. Like right now, that Queensland Health document basically says if anyone's got any symptoms, they're not going to school. So I can't imagine they're going to be happy with them staying at school camp. But that's again, like you said, it's a discussion with your clients as well. And like Guys said, about how this is going to be managed. And again, I think a lot of these discussions need to be had. And I'm just trying to put out some actions for consideration, really. So, yeah. So I think some of that stuff, I don't know whether that's going to be relevant, and I need to sort of do some work on that area. A
lot of this stuff is stuff we've done consistently for the last 2 years. Like we've still got a health management plan that was built off the old industry plan and all that sort of thing that is still incredibly relevant.
Yep.
So the difference with this circumstance is that there's this perception that somehow we've lost our mojo. And what we need right now is clarity and guidance about what happens on the 5th of March. And I don't know this meeting's helped us to get any clarity at all.
So, mate, I don't know. Like, I don't think the education minister was asked on radio on Monday about could they government guarantee school camps will come back on the 4th or 5th of March, and the answer then was no, they can't guarantee it. That was the answer. So I don't think you're going to get that answer out of today's session. Like, I don't think there's an answer to that right now.
But there's a disconnect because we're not actually being able. How do we get into her office and have a conversation so that these major decisions that are costing us millions of dollars aren't being made on assumptions?
Yep. Well, mate,
Dom, do you want to mention, I guess we're like, from the association's perspective and Dom's perspective, we're struggling to get into the office, but there are other pathways that you could email Grace, the minister, start talking to your local members.
We did that 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, look, we're limited by the same other than going and sitting in her office, which you can go and knock on a door, but I'm not sure that she'll open. We're all limited by similar things, but a consistent, following up, saying that you haven't got your messages from your local member and to Grace and others is probably going to be, we're limited to that pathway in many respects.
And there's no representatives who were willing to come to this call. So it's at least another week lost if they come next week, if they come.
Yeah, so that, they're unavailable this week, and I've mentioned that. I mean, I don't, I guess this call isn't be all and end all. This isn't everything, but I would have loved to have someone here today, but we didn't get that. So I think we need to make do, what we can today and then keep working on it. But, it's not like we're just going to switch off and go, oh, well, we'll just do nothing till next week. It's still keep on working.
So Dom, rather than wait for them to come to our meeting on a Friday, could you approach them and say, when are they available? Because I will move heaven and earth to make that meeting possible. So when they're available, let's call a meeting rather than wait for them to say, I can make Friday, I can't make Friday. It could be a Monday, Tuesday, or any day of the week. Just whenever they're available, we're keen to have their ear. So perhaps you could reach out to them again and say, look, I understand you couldn't make Friday, but could you tell us when you are available, and then call a meeting at that time? Is that an option?
Yeah, that's what I did last week, Guy, and they said they'd be here today. So, and they have already told me.
Can you give us the name of the person who said that? Because
this isn't here a stitch up of someone from education who we're hoping will join us. This is about.
It's not a stitch up. It's not stitching up. It's not personal, Dom. It's just a level of accountability. I mean, there is people that are not employed. I mean, there's people without paychecks. It's not about stitching them up. It's just about going. If they don't have the respect enough as an organisation, then we just need to call them out. And unfortunately, because of their lack of joining us, we need to call them out in ways that, I mean, I'm not comfortable. I don't enjoy using the media, but I also understand not that we're desperate, because desperate is emotional, but we are actively fighting the fight. And I just don't think it's okay to go, well, they said no and we wait a week. I actually think, well, let's call them out. Let's use what we do have and just say, look, this person said they were coming and then they didn't, and maybe someone else can pursue that for us.
Yeah, that's as I said, mate. I'm still going to keep working and try to get someone from the education department for the next session. But I think that's all I can do really at this point. I might tidy up this and send it out to everyone. This document, as I said, it's not finished yet and it still needs some work. And it may not be finished until maybe Monday. I still really need to spend a bit of time on it, and time is in short supply, as everyone's well aware. And then, you can have a look at it and you can pick and choose what you do or don't want to do. And you might say, I'm already doing all of that. Why are you giving this to me? But I think it's partly about having a document that can be also shared into the education department and to potentially Queensland Health. And some of it, that they might say you don't need to do that. I'm not trying to get this as an approved industry plan, because I think we're not going to get that again. But it's about having a document that at least puts some statements out there for consideration, or actions for consideration. So yeah, we'll definitely share that document, and you can make of it what you will. All right. Now we're a little bit over time, and I'm conscious of that, but there's still a couple of things I just want to go through. So if you do have to leave, that's cool, and some people have, but yeah, I'll just keep going. So there's a few things we've already sort of talked about that. I hope you can see that screen of the presentation again, about what you might be able to do, what you can do right now. It's the same list we talked about last year about contacting local MPs and ministers and potentially media, as Guy just said. Think about what's right for you. But the big thing, as I said, is that, planning for resumption. Brendan, did you want to have a quick chat about the proposed REAQ workshop?
Yeah, I can do that. Look, I guess from the OEAQ perspective, you know, we're looking at, well, we've got this time at the moment and we're thinking, what can we do for the profession in the meantime? So we've chatted about offering some PD, some online PD, if that's something that organisations and individuals would be receptive to, and we're trying to do it at, you know, if you're a member of OEAQ, it would be free, and I'm talking to Dom about how we can make it, if you're a member of OEAQ, it might be free as well. So just, I guess, as a means to provide some support in other ways that, you know, that we're not being able to make some success so far as to getting Queensland Education talking to us. So one of the initial proposals is, I think it's Tuesday week. Have you got, did I send you through the blurb, Dom?
Yes, mate. Yep, 22nd of Feb.
22nd of Feb. We're looking at one of the OEAQ members, Dr. Glyn Thomas, has been doing work on facilitation for forever and a day, and looking at running a workshop based on understanding and working within your own sort of frameworks that you use to facilitate outdoor educational outdoor programs of schools and full groups and different groups. It's not a process of he's going to come in and sit on the high altar chair and speak down to everybody. It's more a process of just having a dialogue and a chat about how and why and what, and some framing ideas as to, you know, things to think about with your sort of work. We're looking at doing that one, and then we'll look at doing some more PD, you know, in the coming weeks as well. And really, it's just as a process to sort of provide some support and maybe fill some gaps that, if there are some, for different organisations.
Terrific. Thanks, Brendan. So, I mean, we'll be more than happy to share information about that too, mate, once you've got it firmed up. So please, yeah, let us know. I think it'd be good to, you know, share that information for everyone, so, as an opportunity.
But, you know, I guess the other things that OEAQ are, you know, we are being active. We're trying to get Grace. We're trying to get the different people. We've been talking to the different, or we're going to be talking to different regional officers of state education as well, and raising it. I guess just trying to come at as many sides as possible. We're supporting Dom's sort of position of writing to your member, because once they start getting more information about a concern, hopefully that lifts the profile of it. But I guess, as you can tell, you know, it's glacial pace at sometimes with Education Queensland. So we'll just keep at it as best we can.
Yeah, thanks, mate. I guess I had another slide of what we're doing, which is about, as I've said, understanding these issues and trying to help with solutions, working with the government departments, getting to the politicians, the decision makers, and we have had some engagement with the media as well. And that's often a tricky situation as far as engaging with media. Sometimes that's about making sure the value of the outdoor opportunities is actually understood, and making sure that people consider it. So, you know, that side of things, you know, it's difficult, but it's something that we need to do and we need to do more of. So we're still, you know, working there on these things. So just before we finish up, I know Tanya did tag about the question about people 16 and up attending camp. So the Education Department had previously clarified that there's no vaccine requirements for kids, school-aged children, whether they're at school or at camp. So I might need to double check if that's changed, but as far as I was aware, that was still the same situation. And that other change, I think, about the vaccination, fully vaccinated being 3 doses, I think they might have said that it's only for people over 16 for that one as well. So that's an ongoing thing, but they have previously clarified that that over 16s don't need to be vaccinated. I'm not sure if anyone else has any information on that that you want to add, but we can certainly check that out.
Someone just quickly, Dom, on that one. The vaccine, in the issue of vaccines, we need to follow the public health legislation, and that is about our workers. And that's what I was talking about before. It doesn't actually say we need to be involved with or have any record of visitors, which are our school camps or our clients. So that's the COVID-19 vaccination requirements for workers in a high-risk setting. So it
Yeah,
really
that's
clearly,
probably-
really clearly sets it out that we need to be aware of our workers, but not so much our visitors.
No, but I think the bit Tanya's asking about is if a school asks what's the situation for vaccination of kids who are over 16, can they come to camp? I think the answer to that generally, and based on, is that's your decision to make if you're going to bring those that group here.
Yeah,
so,
yeah, correct.
That's really
the visitor, the client's decision. It's not our decision. We're not responsible for that because we only need to be responsible for our workers.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. I would say that they were pretty clear that you didn't have to be vaccinated to attend school. And I think this is possibly one of the reasons why outdoor education facilities got bundled up in the high-risk venues direction, because of the expectation that our staff would be working with unvaccinated minors, and that would include unvaccinated people 16 to 18.
Yeah, which is going back to that point about even if there's no requirement to be vaccinated to be at school. So I think it does go back to that there is that point of it is up to the client to know what the rules are. But, you can tell them that's your understanding of it, but it's up to them to make sure that they're following the rules like every other organisation and individual. All right. Oh, and Mark's just said he'll pass that on to Tanya. So thanks, mate. So that's pretty much brings us to the end. We've had an extended special session today. Thanks very much to Brendan and OEAQ for the work that you guys are doing and for joining us today. We will have another session next week. As I said earlier, we're hoping to have a rep from Education Queensland there, hoping to still have that focus on what this all looks like as school camps resume, which we're hoping is sooner rather than later, obviously. I just want to give you a reminder of those resources on our website. We'll also finish up that document and send it out as a draft. More than happy to do that. A big thanks again to Mark Squires for co-hosting today.
Excuse me, Dom. Can I just say, if you get the yes from Ed Queensland to come next Friday, then Outdoors Queensland starts to put that on social media, just so there's a record of it. That hey, we've got Ed Queensland coming on Friday. Try and get it out and about, just to help them understand. If they've said yes, they're going to show up. That there is some public accountability in that, so they can't just pull it again. Just a tactic. I'm clutching at straws here, mate, like the rest of us.
Yeah, understood, mate. As I say, I'm sure, I think it has, as I said earlier, it's been a ridiculous week for everyone in there in Department of Education. And yeah, I think I'm hopeful that if someone commits to joining us next Friday, then we'll have a rep from Education Queensland here next Friday. So I'm choose to be optimistic about that, mate. And yep, happy to see what we can do on making sure that happens. So, we do have a session next week, 11 o'clock. But yeah, we'll finish up now for today. A big thank you to everyone for joining us. I'm going to sign off with my standard finishing statement, and I mean all of this. Please look after yourself, look after others, and look after the planet. And on the looking after yourself, if you do need help at this time, there are plenty of services. There's people, even just friends you can talk to. Please think about that, because if you need help, please avail yourselves of what help is available to you. So, and thank you very much for the messages of support that have come through the chat. I do appreciate that too. So thanks very much, everyone, for joining us, and thanks for all your contributions today. Really appreciate it. And thanks, Brendan, again, mate, for what you and the OEAQ are doing as well for the sector.